were some big, and then we'll drill down from there. We'll get into, I'll ask you some specific things. I guess we're starting. Hi everyone, I'm Curt Marvis. Just quickly by way of background, I was originally in the traditional production business. I had a company that did hundreds of music videos back in the 80s and 90s when MTV still rocked. And then was in the CD-ROM business for a number of years, which transitioned me ultimately into the internet. I started a company called Cinema Now back in 1999, which is one of the first companies delivering movies and TV over the internet. I most recently served as president of Lionsgate Digital for 4 years, and now I'm off on my own. So I've attended many NATPEs over the years. I've attended many CESs over the years. And I thought we'd start. Steve can introduce himself, and then we'll get into some questions about what happened at CES for those of you who didn't make it and for those of you who did make it, but spent too much time gambling and not enough time working. So, Steve, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, again, I'm Steve Koenig with Consumer Electronics Association. We are the U.S. trade association representing the consumer electronics business in the United States. We're perhaps best known for a small trade show that we host every January in Las Vegas, the International CES, and that's obviously what we're here to talk about. My role at CEA is generally market research as an industry analyst, speaking about trends, but also doing 5-year forecasting to look at the growth trajectories of various technologies. But most of all, I enjoy speaking about the trends because it's such a dynamic industry. So thank you for being here. And just by show of hands, how many of you actually made it out to the CES just a couple of weeks ago?
Oh, wow,
just a few of you, maybe? Okay, wow. Well, the rest of you really should get out.
Who were all those other people?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we'll catch you up on all the trends. So you made a good choice to be here.
So for those of you then, which is most of you that didn't attend CES, and maybe I assume you know this, but it's the Consumer Electronics Show. And the Consumer Electronics Show over the years has changed, from my point of view, fairly dramatically, from being a show that was truly just about electronics when it really started, just as Comdex was a computer show when it used to go on simultaneously. And now it's morphed into something where every major studio is there, every major e-commerce provider. There's just a lot of ancillary businesses that go beyond just computers and televisions and PCs, et cetera. How would you, Steve, characterize, I guess what I'll call the 2013 CES and how you guys view it and what it's really about?
Well, sure. Well, for the past several years, you're absolutely correct that the CES has really represented hardware, content, and everything in between. We look around the show floor at the CES and we see this intersection of content and devices. Content, I remember several years ago, I think it was about 2006 or 7, we kind of called the CES like the Bastille Day of content, because content had been suddenly liberated from traditional devices such as TVs as one example. So people were starting to shift viewing patterns, and we've seen the device story as well as content distribution and connectivity, wireless networks and so forth really play out in the halls of CES. And looking at 2013, all those trends certainly apply. But as always, innovation is omnipresent in our consumer electronics industry. And at CES, I think several trends really spring to mind as kind of the key ones to really pay attention to. The first is what we witnessed is a collision of devices between smartphones and tablets on one end of the screen size spectrum, and then tablets and notebook computers or ultrabooks. So we'll perhaps have a chance to talk a little bit about that, but that collision of products and new products filling in the gaps in between. Another trend that was very, very omnipresent, if you will, again at CES was ultra high definition, really representing what's the next big thing in entertainment. But more and more connectivity. We saw a lot of different wireless connectivity marketplace coming in there, all kinds of devices with operating systems like Android being put into everything from not just cell phones, but also car stereos as one example. And in the car, apps that are on your phone actually being able to be transferred right through to the car stereo and displayed there. So lots of innovation happening.
Well, you know, it's interesting. I mean, for this audience in particular, which is a content-oriented show, a television-oriented show specifically. I mean, everyone here obviously knows that television can now be seen through Hulu and off your PC and your iPhone and iPad, et cetera, et cetera. I guess my question is, the granddaddy device of all is the television. I think Mark Cuban in his keynote the other day was somehow going back and championing the living room. And what do you see happening? I mean, there was the 3D revolution, HD TV. What do you see happening specifically on that device in the living room that's changing, that may affect the programming that people here are creating?
Well, let me start with another big trend that I failed to mention earlier, and that is the evolution of the way we interact with technology. And the living room is a great arena to look at how this is starting to take shape. What I'm talking about is voice recognition, gesture control, things of that nature. That was one huge innovation in the living room, looking at the TV set with the ability to really control the TV with your voice, to also, volume up, volume down. But it goes beyond that to when we talk about, like here at NATPE with social TV and second screen type experiences, and how do we integrate that in seamlessly with built-in sensors in the bezel of the TV, like a camera and a microphone. Really all the viewer has to do is just make a thumbs up signal. And then instantly that is transmitted out to Facebook, and all of his social network knows that he or she is given that particular show a thumbs up. So that's one part. The ultra high definition is certainly the other part. I think we'll talk a little bit more, adding to that more immersive and engaging content experience. But the other thing that really impressed me was the notion of search really gaining momentum on the TV. I mean, we've always had this proverbial, I've got 1,000 channels on my satellite or cable network that I subscribe to, or a provider, but I don't watch 90% of them. There's got to be more that I'm missing. I hear about things. So the ability to, again, with this new interface, the new UI that we're bringing forward with a lot of these new TVs, being able to just speak to the remote and say, find me a movie with Brad Pitt. This was actually the exact sentence that Samsung was using in their demo, and it would bring up on the screen all the various movies. It would search online, it would search your DirecTV channels, subscriptions, etc., and would put it all there, and you could see when these shows or movies are going to play. You could schedule it to record. So content discovery and empowering the consumer in that way is another really huge trend, certainly for this audience they're spending your time and energy creating that content. You want people to be able to find it, and I think now they have more powerful tools to do so than ever.
And what was your impression this year? There's, Chuck Parker, who's one of the guys who started the Second Screen initiative. There's been so much talk of second screen, and my joke to Chuck always is that for my kids, the TV's the second screen. They do everything on their iPad and their phone. But
exactly.
I'm curious from the CES and the CEA's perspective, what do you think about the whole second screen concept? What behaviors have you seen in consumer studies about showing interest in second screen? I mean, do people, I never watch television without my phone or my pad or laptop or whatever there, and usually I'm doing two things at once.
Correct.
But have you seen people really starting to embrace second screen where consumers are wanting that as part of their television experience?
We're right on I think the doorstep of broader engagement from a consumer standpoint. Our research has shown just what you were describing, is that for years people have sent a text message, or they've had right there on the living room couch their cell phone, for example, and they've reviewed email or something like that during a commercial break perhaps, or whenever. So the whole notion of second screen has really been with us for quite a while. But what's starting to happen now, and it's been talked about, so I won't belabor the point, but there's some more tangible with apps and some other properties coming onto that second screen to add that next level of engagement and entertainment, information, what have you. And our research shows that consumers are most assuredly interested in that type of experience, any way that they can augment, because these people are investing their time, and none of us have more time these days, do we? So if we expect consumers to continue to invest more and more of their time with us, we've got to give them more reason to do so. And so additional content on that second screen, integrating their social networks. A lot of people, we have the Twitter critics in abundance and so forth. I mean, pushing beyond that to really, it's about community. A sense, if you like Criminal Minds, you're part of the Criminal Minds community. There's a lot of engagement. And I think also you're starting to see from the content side, potentially entire storylines being generated through these social networks and direct feedback coming through that second screen in the living room.
And so when sort of the concept of just because you can doesn't mean you want to or will with technology. Sometimes technology has allowed things. I mean, even, we were speaking briefly about the 3D revolution never really happened the way people were expecting it to, say, a matter of 2 or 3 years ago. And do you think, or I should say, what sort of behavioral changes do you see in how a consumer is interacting with content being driven by the technology changes that are happening with unlimited delivery of video to devices, again, people having access to video at any point in time? What are some of the key things that you're seeing changing because the technology is allowing a different viewing experience?
Sure, so we did an entire consumer research study focused on video consumption and what's happening out there, how are people consuming video, and the biggest trend to come out of that study was one I like to call watching more, watching more. And what it means is that people are watching on more devices, and ergo, they're watching more video content. So this is what, and again, we're asking people to invest their time, but they wouldn't be making these time investments if they weren't interested in the content. So as that content has populated, consumers are telling us through the research that they really want a congruent experience across any of the screens. I mean, certainly the first screen, the second screen, and I'm not saying that, we were talking in the speaker ready room about Lord of the Rings, I think, and I don't think anyone expects someone to watch a 3-hour movie on their smartphone, but there are certain genres of content that are very appealing, and we're seeing ramping consumer engagement in that area. So again, watching more, watching more.
And it's interesting with NATPE, even taking place here in Miami, I think everybody's aware there's a huge influx of people from Latin America coming in. It used to be called CES. You've, I think, officially now changed the name to International CES.
International CES,
yes. If you haven't been to CES, there literally are people from all over every conceivable country in the world. And I think you see a lot of NATPE driving towards an international feel. How do you handle, behavior in Korea is different than behavior in Soviet Union, is different than behavior in France or Brazil and the United States. Where does CES fall in terms of sort of orchestrating and organizing that diverse sort of set of use cases around the world?
Well, we kind of like to say that CES, in terms of that hardware and content and everything in between, really that interplay, I mean, that's the center of the universe, is what we like to think. And really, there's very few places other than the CES where you really truly can, in 4 days, go around and get a really good perspective on how that interaction and that interplay is happening across those devices. Now, we have a lot of product that is shown that is for the US market. There's increasingly product that's shown for other markets. For example, Huawei, a handset manufacturer, had the Ascend Mate, a 6-inch phone, or some people like to call it a phablet. This is kind of getting to that collision trend that I was talking about. Is it a tablet or is it a phone? And those are for specific markets. But invariably what happens is that's the play going into the show, but coming out, they see a market opportunity either domestically or maybe in Western Europe. But ultimately, I mean, it's a function of many things. I mean, cultural, socioeconomic norms, the business climate, how is the stage set for broadband and connectivity? You mentioned Korea. I mean, one of the most connected countries in the globe. So, and it's also, like I said, the cultural affinity for mobile devices and so forth. But the reverse of that is that even in developing technology economies, Africa, Middle East, Eastern Europe as one example, we're seeing these economies and countries really leapfrogging over all kinds of various technologies that we've kind of been there, done that. But for example, going straight to advanced wireless networks, smartphones, straight to high definition flat screen televisions, those consumers they're just like us. They're not satisfied to, well, you must adhere to this certain CE evolutionary path to earn the right to buy your flat screen. You've got to have a tube TV first. Well, bollocks on that. They want a flat screen and they want it now. But coming back to the smartphone and kind of what we see happening with some of these developing tech economies, the notion is that they're trying to facilitate a climate for business investment, foster that kind of investment to grow their own economies, and consumer electronics and building out that infrastructure is probably one of the best ways that they can do that.
And we were chatting on the way over about some of the challenges for a couple of the Japanese television manufacturers. I think it'd be interesting for people to hear some of the comments you were making about the speed of change now that's happening with consumer electronics hardware. Yeah. And how that's driving, what's, to some degree, even I think probably what's happening in the content space as well.
Sure. Well, the big trend I like to call it's CE-volution. So CE-volution, and it's happening, but it's at such a pace that you almost don't feel it. And what I'm talking about is that back in the analog days, we had purpose-built devices, turntables, VCRs, etc. And now that we've crossed into the, over a decade ago, we crossed into the digital era, we've seen this steady collapse of product, down to the scope of devices is starting to narrow and narrow and narrow. And I'm not talking about just ownership, but really the scope of devices that we use on a daily basis. Now, counter to that narrowing is a broadening trend of connectivity. And again, consumers are really defining themselves today by mobility and connectivity. The two are inseparable, and that's what they want. So this kind of idea of CE-volution is kind of what I would point to answer the question.
And there were a couple of, there were a number of controversial companies and things that were showcased at CES this year. Charlie Ergen always seems to get people riled up, and Dish Hopper was certainly, for those of you who don't know, Dish Hopper is for Dish Networks. It allows you to actually just skip past a commercial automatically. So there have been a lot of legal.
Aereo is another one.
And Aereo is another one. So as an association that's bringing together the Hollywood studios, the consumer electronics manufacturers, the platform manufacturers, the technology companies, the Microsofts, the Googles into kind of one collective space. Where do you guys sit on things like Dish Hopper and Aereo? Aereo, for those who don't know, allows you to take television over the top, basically, in through their device. It's backed, Barry Diller's one of the investors, and it's also been extremely controversial in its launch. Where does the CEA, Consumer Electronics Association, and CES, what's your point of view on those things, and how do you sort of deal with having controversial products in something where you're bringing people who are pissed off at each other together?
Well, witness innovation. I mean, that again is the lifeblood of our industry, and one thing I can say that CEA fully supports is innovation. We're convinced that innovation is what is going to make America great again, lead us into the next digital economy, and to kind of step back or step down from the soapbox, if you will, a little bit. We take a position when it's appropriate. I mean, we serve at the pleasure of our members. And so a lot of this we will have filings with the FCC, and we'll advise them on spectrum allocation, spectrum auctions, for example. We've advocated for a lot of the broadcast spectrum for TV broadcast to be allocated more towards wireless broadband, because that is the real growth channel right now. So, and there are probably some of you in the room that might rally against that notion. But we'll take a position here, but I mean, we encourage innovation, and I think that's what you see time and time again in consumer electronics are challenges to the norm. And there are many icons over the many years, not just Steve Jobs, but several other folks that have really changed the paradigm in consumer electronics. And it takes that kind of innovation to really push us all forward.
You know, it's interesting because I think, is it the Smart TV Alliance? Am I correct in that?
That's one of many.
One of many. So the question really is, you know, Apple obviously, you know, made fundamental changes in consumer behavior around content with the iPhone, iPad, et cetera. But it stayed in its own silo, and it always has, and you know, appears it always will, at least for the foreseeable future. Whereas the smart TVs, you know, there have been all these different formats, whether it's the codecs of encoding or whether it's the chipsets and the way they work. What is the CEA doing and CES doing in terms of things like the Smart TV Alliance? Is your belief that standards have to be created for these businesses to ultimately become successful, or how do you view those sorts of things?
Well, in a nutshell, the answer is yes to your question. We do have an entire group at CEA devoted to standards development, and the idea behind this is that through standards development, bringing everybody in the industry together to decide is the best way to expedite innovation to the marketplace. And you know, we've had some hits and misses, to be honest. If you take a look back at the HD DVD Blu-ray, the industry could not reach consensus. There were investments on both sides, and it was really a shame. And I think that's actually one of the reasons that so many consumers went right into streaming services like Netflix or Vudu or Cinema Now, because they were frustrated by that. Well, you know, I can only get these movies on this player, and then it got all sorted, and it really didn't matter anymore, did it? So I think we would prefer to work out those things in a standards format where everyone can compete, and that can be the focus of competition. But you know, again, we don't always succeed.
And I want to leave time for a couple of questions. If people have questions, we'll get started with those in a minute or two. But I wanted to ask if you felt that as I told you earlier, my contention is that 20, 30 years ago, electronics manufacturers did not need to be sort of linked into the content food chain, if you will. Do you agree with me that that's changed? Do you think the Samsungs and the LGs and the Sonys and the whoever's of the world need to be involved in content in a way that's different than it was years ago? Or is it basically the same? They manufacture the hardware, and what shows up on it is somebody else's problem.
Well, yeah, the question about content, I mean, that came up, believe it or not, about 10 years ago, and the answer back then was it's increasingly less relevant to bring forward just a dumb playback device with no connectivity, no embedded content, something like that. That's certainly true today, and yes, I think it is imperative that industry and content producers work together. There's obviously a lot of harmony that can be achieved there, and further innovation. I think that kind of collaborative effort, when we talk about second screen and what might we be able to do, and technologies like audio watermarking and digital connectivity and the gesture recognition. I mean, we bring our stuff, you bring your stuff, let's put it together, and greatness can really happen, and that's when we inspire consumers, and we both win, because for our industry, we make more sales, and you have a higher level of engagement with your brands and your various properties. So.
And you said you'd been with CEA over 10 years now?
I'm in my 10th year.
Okay, so in your 10th year, so when you started, let's see, there was no YouTube. Google was a fairly young company. There was certainly no iPhone, no iPad.
Yeah, Apple wasn't.
Apple
it was a shadow of what it is
today. A
today.
shadow of its current self, even with the stock price dropping still. And so my question is, looking out now, 5 years, 10 years out, what does your crystal ball tell you people will be talking about at CES in terms of things that may or may not even exist today?
Sure. Well, with some certainty, I'll go with about 5 years, because it's really I get asked this question a lot, and it's innovation is almost impossible to predict. But what I can say with certainty is that we'll be talking, like in the living room, I think we'll be talking more about OLED TVs for a variety of reasons. We'll be talking more about ultra high definition. I think really we're at the early stages of that development, and there's very, very clear, to my mind, echoes of about 10 years ago with high definition. I think in the mobile device space, we'll probably be looking at 2 devices instead of 3. Instead of a notebook, a tablet, and a smartphone, consumers will probably have 2. And again, that ties back to that C-evolution trend where we have this narrowing scope of devices. So there's going to be an ongoing collapse in that mobile device category. And I think that the role of hardware in the story of CE will continue to be less and less. It really is more about the content, as we like to say, content first. And that's absolutely a correct statement. But it's also software. We're seeing a lot of technologies turn into apps. Take a look at portable navigation devices like Garmin, Magellan. I mean, a lot of people have they don't even go there because they can get an app, Google Maps on my smartphone. MP3 players, and people are starting to use their smartphones. So it's hardware becoming software. It's a collapse, a narrowing scope of devices. So those are some of the themes I think we can expect to see more of in the coming years at CES.
There are microphones out here, so if you have a question, if you wouldn't mind stepping up to the microphone, that would be great. So no one has any questions for this? I mean, you get one opportunity
one right
to have
here.
a man like Steve who knows a heck of a lot more than I do about this stuff. One question while we're waiting to see if anybody wants to come up.
Come on, to the microphone.
And I just went blank on what I was going to ask you. Oh, I was going to say, you'd probably have a lot of data about this, but Android, I was talking to somebody the other day. I mean, talk about a platform that, I don't know, does anybody know when did Android sort of officially come into the marketplace? 4 or 5 years ago?
About, yeah.
4 to 5 years ago?
Yeah.
And now it has, what, 60+% market share of mobile devices?
Correct, yeah.
I mean, it's insane.
And it's being pushed in a number of, not just smartphones, but in a number of devices, like I said before. I mean, there's even an espresso maker that runs Android.
And it's still, for me personally, it still makes me wonder about the whole Microsoft, Apple thing that happened. And it's like, if Apple had licensed that platform out, would they have 95% market share now? It seems that way.
Well, and here comes Android with the big right hook, right?
That's a different discussion. Go ahead.
I apologize if I missed the first half. I came in late. But I'm wondering if you touched on anything with regards to, we're existing in a multi-platform universe. I was at CES this year. I've been going for 10 years. Love the show. Love the show. But I noticed that even appliances are becoming like smart devices insofar as Android and iOS and these platforms are being embedded. So all this content's kind of following us around, of course. But what's going to happen as far as monetization, the giant M word, around that? As more platforms and devices, hardware, become exposed to advertising content, what do you sort of see on the horizon for how we reach consumers in the fridge? Like, it makes sense that somebody would open up one of those smart fridges and get an ad for maybe an upsell on an organic piece of produce that they've run out of or something. Are you seeing good examples of that in the market, or is it still a dog's breakfast?
Good term, dog's breakfast, yes. I think that the sky's the limit, really. I mean, and again, we need more innovation, and I'll give you an example. Some of the connected device or connected appliances that we're seeing, part of that is a smart grid story, energy efficiency. It's not really about that your washing machine can send you a text when it's completed its cycle. Maybe a little bit. Maybe some of us might think that's kind of cool. Hey, honey, it's time for you to go change the laundry out. What? So
somebody showed me an example of actually a firmware upgrade being pushed to a smartphone, a Samsung smartphone, that then relayed to the dryer to have a better intelligence for cycling, undergarments or something like that. It still kind of seems absurd, though, right?
Well, but to answer your question, I think one ostensible play could be, with advertising, consumers aren't going to tolerate just being blitzed every time they open the refrigerator door, to use your example. So you've got to tie that in with something that is of value to the consumer. And I think one of those things that's of value is with whether it's RFID or barcode scanning, something like that. When you're putting products into the refrigerator, it picks up on those. It knows that the milk, you bought it on this and such date, and it can tell you when you need to order more, or maybe there are weight sensors to say that, you're down to 1 beer, Steve. You might want to order some. In fact, would you like to, with Peapod, just on that touchscreen on your just go ahead and order some right now. And maybe there's an ad that goes along with that. So I think that kind of integration with that innovation, it's not just about advertising, but advertising wrapped around different business models. So that's, I think, what's going to be the stickiness that's going to really capture people's imaginations.
I'll also just comment, one of the things that I saw at CES this year, that when you think about the amount of time that people spend on their mobile phones and the amount of advertising revenue that comes out of that usage, it's just minuscule compared to any other sort of thing that you stare at all day long. Yeah. And I'm totally convinced. I saw a number of companies, you mentioned that, we're looking in that area. I still haven't seen one that's figured it out. I really haven't. Believe me, if I had the idea, I'd be doing the startup tomorrow. And it's funny, I was saying to somebody, it's like when Google came out, nobody was clamoring for another search engine at that time. It wasn't as if anybody wanted another search engine. It's like what was out there seemed good enough. And I personally believe the biggest piece of disruption we'll see is the monetization of the time spent staring down at that mobile phone in the next 10 years. It has to happen.
I think social gaming is still kind of the stealth,
Within
display ads, it's still the old model. I mean, between the commercial break and the banner ad, we haven't figured out a better way to pay for our content. But I think social gaming is now building, those publishers of multiple games are building their own little ad networks. And that's sort of a trend that I've noticed just over the next while, even though it's focused on gaming. But,
well, the interesting thing is with phones, it's a scary thing as well, of course, because of privacy, but I mean, effectively the phone operator knows everything about what you do, who you call, where you go, when you go there, when you talk to them, how long, it's insane. So that's going to be interesting to see from my vantage point at least. And I saw a couple skunkworks companies at CES this year that were looking into figuring out how to monetize that, which again could happen in a content sense for people in this room. The shorter form content revolution is still trying to get going. So.
Yeah, you brought up social gaming, but expand that a little bit to gamification, another industry buzzword.
Yeah.
We were dropping a lot of them in this session. Yeah. But yeah, gamification, I mean, I was at a conference in the UK last year, and one of the coolest apps that I learned about was in this kind of advertising gamification play was from Heineken. And this was around the Euro Cup, and you could have this app. It was a Heineken app, and you could, while you're watching the games live, you could predict and say, oh, this player, he's about to score. He's going to score. And if you were right, you got so many points. And then there were prizes and so forth. That maybe it's a keg of Heineken. I can't remember. But awarded for that. And people were just, by their estimation, the thousands and thousands, tens of thousands, were really into this. And so tying it too with gamification around big events. We've got the World Cup coming up very soon in Brazil. You'll probably see a lot more gamification type branding, advertising, apps, things of that nature taking place.
Okay, our time is up. Anybody have one last burning question that they can? Here, there you go.
Yep.
Just wondering about your thoughts on 3D in television.
Sure, good question. 3D, I think we've established that 3D was not the be-all, end-all that a lot of the folks in the industry and the TV manufacturers mainly. A couple things on 3D. CEA's perspective has always been that this is a very event-driven technology, whether it's sports, gaming. Was never really meant to be a 24/7. The research that we've done with consumers shows that right off the top, you have to just basically take away a very significant segment of consumers who are very adverse to wearing any kind of technology. And I'm not talking about just like a watch, but the 3D glasses, even if they may be passive, just like sunglasses, they don't want to put those on. Maybe at the theater that's okay, but in their home they don't want to have to be putting them on and off. They get lost, etc. So there's that, but there's a definite preference for auto-stereoscopic, and I think that makes sense to everybody in the room. Yeah, okay, well, if we can get that. But by and large, it really is centering again around event-driven. So from a hardware standpoint and product availability, when you buy your next TV, chances are you're going to get 3D whether you really want it or not. Our other position on this is that it is a feature. And it is that 3D TV isn't going to take over the world. It is a new feature that consumers can take advantage of if and when they choose in their viewing experience.
All right, well, Steve, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Enjoy the rest of NATPE.